via camera or write in chat and such. It's one of the slow days for Google Meet, and we don't know if we're recording or not. Totally awesome, since I'm recording this from the Prometheus. Finally. Welcome, everyone. Maybe you already heard me babble. Today is the 28th of April, 2022, Prometheus Dev Summit. Yeah. Welcome, everyone. Please remember to write yourselves into the meeting notes. I'm going to leave them now. And as per usual, in particular for external people, feel more than welcome to speak up at any time and give your voice and insight and input. Of course, that's why we make those calls public and why we invite people and everything. The only time we ask you to not speak up is during call for consensus. Of course, that's when we when we need to count or when we need to actually But at all other times, please speak up. One minor point of order, I forgot to put the right voting thing into the backlog doc. So for Bartek and Julian and Simon, you might have voted by accident on the wrong thing or only on one thing. Yeah, not huge, but just FYI, in case you intended to also vote for the other thing or only for the other thing. The other thing, would it be okay to do a small override? Could open a PR today about long-term support in Prometheus, which we talked about July of last year, which I had totally forgotten about, but which is also totally awesome. And current plan is to cut long-term support release in July with version 2.37. We already have consensus that we want to do it, and now we have someone who's willing to do the work. The only reason why I'm bringing this up is if someone has any thoughts, concerns about this specific version or this specific timeline, anything, now is the time to raise your voice or stay forever silent. Okay, then I merge the PR and we have an announcement of a long-term support image for Prometheus. Nice. That's like we can already stop the call and we have this is already great news. Recording rules in Prometheus agent. We don't have Bartek here. We don't have Simon here. We do have Ganesh and Julian. We can talk about it. We can also shelve it for next time when we hopefully have Simon and Bartek around. I'm fine either way. What would people prefer? I can't English.
I mean, next time is the in-person one, right? So
yes.
We might even curate topics to if they're like particularly suitable to be discussed in person and do the ones that are straightforward enough to discuss them here. And then, of course, in person also means that not everyone might be there, which is the downside.
No. Yeah, good point. I'm personally fine either way. I just don't want to.
I mean, Bartek will be there at the in-person one, I'm pretty sure. I'm not sure about Simon. I didn't hear if he will be at KubeCon.
Ganesh, remind me, you will be there, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So let's shelve it because we only have 50% of the people who vote, or 40% of the people who voted for it. 60.
Can I express my opinion anyway?
Sure. We can also just talk about it. It's completely fine.
Yeah. No. I think we should talk about it a bit, so at least we have some discussion ahead of.
Okay.
I think if you want to do recording rules in an agent, you can just run a regular Prometheus server and just set a short retention time and turn off compaction.
Yes, I think that basically we should have an option not to create the blocks and just work with the heads. Because currently Prometheus will always create blocks, right? even with a short retention time.
Yeah, but I don't see any harm in just, having blocks written. Is it that much IO that it's a problem for people that want to run recording rules?
There's one argument which, so if we look back, I think even like almost 2 years, there was this argument about should the agent just be a Prometheus without storage, basically, and have all the other capabilities. Looking at what's like the type of questions which Grafana customers ask and such, or attendees of webinars, and so they keep being confused about this and about what the precise cutoff is. And I do think there is some value in having something called an agent, which still has basically all capabilities. That might not be like, except for real storage, that might not be for everyone. But as an option, I personally have come to the conclusion that this would be nice. But also I don't feel super strongly. But there is some desire for Prometheus in all but in name, which is weird, but it is what it is.
But the issue with the current state and the pull request that we have is that the performance is probably a lot worse than regular Prometheus. I mean,
Yeah, my whole motivation to use agent mode, for example, is I'm going to be scraping large amounts of container metrics and then using it to remote write out container metrics to shard out, basically using it as a sharding creation proxy for very large Kubernetes clusters, because I can use hashmod to shard out Prometheus, and then those will fan into namespace Prometheuses. It's a little convoluted, but it deals with huge numbers of containers where users want to have their container metrics in their namespace. And so they've got a namespace of X number of thousands of pods, and this other user has another namespace with thousands of pods, but together they make the container metric Prometheus because it's like hundreds of gigabytes of memory. And using agent mode saves me that memory and also allows me to shard in weird ways. And so I want agent mode basically as slim as possible to scrape and forward. Because even if I wanted to do like recording rules, that would be too much because my scraper is too big. Because Kubernetes doesn't provide me metrics on container metrics on a namespace by namespace basis. It provides it on a node by node basis. And so I ask the node and I get all the container metrics for every namespace on that node. And this is a huge cardinality problem for me with tens of thousands of containers per cluster.
Anyone, any thoughts? I mean, Ben said he wanted to talk about it only for a short time, and that is currently a short time, which is also completely fine.
Rant over. We can move on.
I just agree with Ben. Huh?
We can note this down and then continue the discussion in Valencia.
Okay. So I marked it as light green, so we know to do it again.
Julian agrees with everything I say.
So Bjorn, Chris Ganesh, Chris. We are. Would you prefer to talk about? Okay, no. Chris is not here, so let's talk about ingestion delays. Björn?
That's my topic.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, this might be subtle enough to also discuss with expert at in Valentia, but perhaps we can also just settle it right now. So do we have the all my notes already in the notes?
Yes.
Yeah.
Full service.
Full service. Okay, I can just read out my notes. So this is what so long ago that I put it in there. I think some colleague at Grafana stumbled upon this. So historically, we had huge problems with ingestion delay, as in samples only show up. I mean, they cannot show up immediately, right? We are very close to that, but there is always an ingestion delay. And Prometheus 1 actually didn't have a lot of ingestion delay, but it had an indexing delay. So you would effectively, new time series wouldn't show up in the index until the index has caught up. And that was particularly bad if you had recording rules, where by having a recording rule running on the very fresh recent data, you would even essentially what's the word? Persist your problem. So you had this weird thing when you restart a service that the new series wouldn't show up. But if you run exactly the same query later for the same time, they would all be there, because by now the indexing has caught up. So you kind of want what people in like remote storage, Cortex, or whatever they are named these days, what they do, that they do rule evaluation with a delay because they have a longer ingestion delay, right? So now we have first of all, Prometheus 2 doesn't have this indexing delay. So that is essentially not noticeable. And we have isolation, which makes sure that all the samples of one scrape become visible at the same time. So at least you don't have this kind of inconsistency. But I think we still have a problem with rules in a group. So now this is what I was hypothesizing. Hypothesis. Anyway, is this a word? Okay, let me explain. So all the rules in a group are evaluated with the same timestamp, but not using the same isolation state. So you have this weird thing. I mean, you did put the rules in this order so that they could all depend on each other, which works. But if they act on some external series that are supposed to be scraped, then rules further down could see more series than rules further up, because by now an isolation group might just have become visible atomically in one go. And then this could have really weird effects that are really hard to even spot. And I think this is what one of my colleagues spotted. So finally, if the same query as the one in a rule is executed later on the historical sample, the result might be different from the rule evaluated at the same time. So, yeah, and that's always the case, even if you just have one rule in that group, because we don't really have an ingestion delay, but we have like an it's an ingestion delay. Like if isolation tells you this all becomes visible, if a scrape takes a long time, then the scrape is timestamped at the beginning, if I remember correctly. Then it takes like 10 seconds to scrape, and then the isolation will atomically make it all visible, but then it's kind of 10 seconds in the past already. That's kind of what I think. And I'm not super confident that this is all correct. So I wanted to throw this at the crowd here. And if that's all true, what can we do about it? Yeah. Me attacks. Yeah, nice. Can we do anything about it? Use the same isolation state for the whole rule group, or delay rule evaluation until all scrapes with the same or earlier timestamp are complete. I mean, these are two problems, right? Same isolation state would still not solve that. If you later evaluate the same expression at the same timestamp, you might still get different results.
The isolation state has other issues because it's expected that rules see the result of previous rules. So if you write a query in one rule, you can use the metric in the next rule. And it also has the issue that then you will make appender last longer. And if you have 10 rules that take 10 seconds, then you will have a very long. It will increase the memory usage of Prometheus because you will need to keep the isolation for a longer period. What I've been thinking in the past is that you could pass in a rule a parameter to evaluate in the past the rule. So you would, instead of evaluate the rule at now, you would evaluate it at now minus 1 minute, for example. Because like if you also use remote write to your Prometheus server, then you don't know when the scrape are finishing actually. So you will have the issue when you don't scrape. Or if you are using federation, then the scrape time does not mean anything either.
Okay, I mean, the isolation state idea is kind of killed, right? For all the reasons you said, Julian.
Well, memory increase might be acceptable, but the fact that you don't see the previous rules is a problem, and we would need to adapt isolation by a lot.
Yeah.
I think the rule evaluation, basically look back delay, or that Ganesh posted, might actually be a good feature to have, because I can intuitively, I think you're correct, and your hypothesis is correct. I don't know about the isolation within rule groups, but even without that, it might still be a good idea simply to give the database some number of seconds to idle, or to complete isolation on some amount of data.
Yeah, so isolation delay is what I was thinking about. I don't think we can have that by default, because then you might have users which end up with how to say that, with out of bound metrics, out of order metrics, which might be another issue, but I think it can be useful for advanced users to have the option.
But if there is like an isolation thing going on for a long time because the scrape takes very long, it will still have this problem, right? If you do like a 10-second.
It's not the delay. We are speaking about the delay here, not keeping the same isolation state, right?
No. I'm just saying, if we just say I evaluate a rule 10 seconds in the past, you might still have a scrape that takes more than 10 seconds that will then lead to, if you later run the same expression of this rule, but on historical data, you might still get different results because
yes, that's why you will need to set up that for each group based on your configuration.
But you just hope that the no scrape will be delayed by more than what you set. I mean, I was more wondering if we could have like an auto thing that this is automatically delayed so that all the scrapes at this timestamp, all the scrapes that have started at this timestamp or before are done. I know I'm not sure if that's feasible or if this would be super expensive to implement, to run.
I have a maybe stupid question because I don't know so much about this, but why do we take the timestamp at the beginning of the scrape and not at the end?
I'm not even sure if that's true. I mean, if some...
It's true, and we have to do that because that's when we request the metrics from the target. So it also enables us to have the same timestamp every time and to use the double delta encoding. So if you take the end of the script, Prometheus will take twice the disk space.
It will
we don't have
to
be precise, but there is also no good answer, because if you have a 10-second scrape, you start getting data and you keep getting data and you already have changes, so it doesn't really make a difference. You can do middle, you can do end, you can do beginning, but mathematically speaking, it's never perfect. So
And
it's bad.
a lot of it depends on the implementation of the backend that is you're scraping from. So some backends can like lock snapshot, and the time delay is all data send and not actual, and rendering and data send, but the actual in-memory snapshot happens much closer to the scrape time, which is a different way of saying what Richie just said.
Yeah, so does somebody know of a reason why it would be infeasibly expensive to just track running scrapes and evaluate a rule at a time t only if all the scrapes that have a timestamp t or earlier are done? Okay, I mean, maybe we could think about it, right?
So I don't think that is expensive, but I can just imagine situations where that would unnecessarily delay some rules. If you have some target that just takes like 5 minutes to scrape or something, and then everything will be delayed.
Yeah, but I mean, you have to scrape timeout for that, right?
Yeah. But I mean, maybe you do have some targets that you do allow a long scrape time for, but you have other stuff that's super fast, and you don't want to delay all your recording rules just because of that.
Yeah, right. Because you cannot know if this scrape will create something that is an input for my recording.
Exactly. Yeah.
When you could still, if we have this evaluation delay per rule group, you could then have an auto setting that helps.
Yeah.
You might get delayed by 5 minutes by the longest scrape timeout, but you will guaranteed to get all the data.
Configurable. Yeah. That could make sense. I don't think we can just change it for everything, right? Because that would be breaking.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think we need something automatic. I think the users could set a value reasonable for them.
I mean, this should be easy, right? And if I understand that correctly, Ganesh's pull request is that. Let me look at this.
Yeah, the change is actually very small. Most of the lines of changes are test, so it's pretty simple to have this.
Well,
I mean,
Grafana has to explicitly say that it's not AGPL and everything, if we take it.
Yeah, the Prometheus fork is Apache 2.
Okay, that's good.
License. Does it still say?
Why would Grafana Labs send an AGPL patch to an Apache project?
Talk about poison pills.
But isn't this sort of delay in recording rule evaluation sort of the price one would have to pay for like a strictly ordered evaluation? And wouldn't that make sense to kind of expose that option to users if they want that or not?
I mean, that's the idea, right?
Yes, that's the
will be
idea.
an option for users.
Yeah. And then, but then that's not really the problem, right? If users are aware that either they get like a deterministic rule evaluation or potentially delays in rule evaluation, that's the two options they have.
Yeah, I mean, I think what the first step would be to just allow the users to set a fixed evaluation delay, which would mean you make it more likely that you get deterministic evaluations, but not completely sure, because in theory, you could still have very long-lasting scrapes. But the users can decide. If they know this rule evaluation is never looking at scrapes that might potentially take long, it's good enough for them. And then in the second step, we could discuss something like, please guarantee that this will, I mean, you can never guarantee it, because scrapes could come in with a set timestamp in the past, right? And if it's not more than an hour or something, Prometheus would still accept it. So it's never guaranteed. Or you could have a recording rule that has a very long range that looks all the way back into the time where deletion already kicks in, right? So there are a million reasons why this is not all guaranteed to be deterministic, but there's one reason you could rule it out, that it's just scrape ingestion delay that makes it non-deterministic.
I see.
Yeah, but if evaluation delay is an easy option, we could just add it and see how much that helps. Yeah, and as I said, I and foremost wanted to know if this is actually a real problem or my line of thought wasn't correct. But yeah, seems to be generally this is a problem and this might be a way to fix it.
Should we do a call for consensus? My gut feeling is no. Also, should we mark this for talking about it again in person, or do you fear we...
I think this now just somebody has to tackle, and if it's like just the introduction of an evaluation delay, it will just be a straightforward pull request, what Ganesh already has done. And if we later go into having this like automatic tracking running scrapes, it might get hairy and we might want to discuss it more, but then it only makes sense if someone is actually implementing it. And perhaps there are not enough pain points so that somebody invests time into this. But then we can see if there's a problem. And so I wouldn't put it on the agenda of Valentia. It's just, I think it's good for now. We know enough.
Good. Yes, please.
Hey, hello. So I just have a very basic question about this long script. So how long it is considered long? Is that longer than the script interval, or 3 or 5 minutes, like that? How shall we decide the script?
I mean, there's a scrape timeout, right? So if you run into the timeout, your scrape gets canceled and you don't get any ingestion. I think the timeout must be at most scrape interval. So you cannot run longer than the scrape interval implicitly. But like long scrapes are fine. Like I had use cases where the scrape would take minutes and you just configure your stuff in that way. And it's not ideal. It's not the basic idea is scrapes should be almost instant, but it happens that they just take a long time. Like cube state metrics, ... could be big.
Maybe as an attempt at a quantitative answer, things get stale after 5 minutes. So if you have a scrape interval which is longer, you will run into issues. And if you have one failure, you don't want any bumpiness in your data. So commonly you wouldn't have more than 2 or 2.5 minutes.
Yeah.
So you can fit 2 of those into the 5 minutes. But that's not like a super hard rule. It's just something which makes sense because that's those magic 5 minutes.
The rule of thumb is because of look-back delta and everything that a scrape interval shouldn't be larger than 2 minutes unless you're doing some power user case. And then if you want to be super, I mean, if you want to be reasonably safe that you don't overrun, you should not have scrapes that regularly take longer than a minute. And this is probably where I would think if your scrape takes longer than a minute, you might not be in a good position. Or you're just doing something special and you set your look back delta to an hour and you scrape interval to 30 minutes. I don't know. I mean, but that's not a normal use case.
Okay, thanks. And just another question is that if we consider a script take 10 seconds, it's normal, and the script taking 2 minutes is not short enough. So what is different between them fundamentally? Does that mean that it is the data is bigger than the buffer to evaluate the recording rules, or something else preventing us to treat them equally?
I think it's not about the size of the scrape. It's really just how long it takes. Sometimes you have like transcontinental scrapes for meta monitoring or something, right? And then it's just slow because your internet connection across the globe is not fast enough. It might be a tiny scrape. It just takes a long time. That's it. I think it's just about the timing, and the timing has to do with how often you want to scrape. And this has to do with the look back delta, which I mean, I sometimes dream we can get rid of the lookback delta and then it wouldn't matter. Like you could have some weird use case where you scrape once per hour and it might take 10 minutes and it's all fine. I think it's really just about timing, and that we, after 5 minutes, consider a sample stale and don't look further back in PromQL unless you configure this in a different way. And it's the only thing. It's not about the volume per se. Prometheus can adjust huge volumes. Even megabyte long labels, I've seen that.
Mhm. Okay, so the long or short is decided by the configuration, means that the operator will decide so how much time is long, how much time is short. It is not a hard limit inside the code of Prometheus, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the lookback delta is configurable via a flag, but it's pretty much a hard limit unless you deal with that.
Okay, it's clear. Thank you.
Okay, what do we do next?
Open. Let's. We don't have Chris here. We can talk about support for prefixing and labels to metrics in client libraries, or tight but new and like nominal too late, but whatever. Have a flag to allow queries to include external labels.
I think we did the prefixing last time, didn't we?
Did we?
I think we skipped it because nobody prepared anything.
I remember we had a discussion, but I don't remember the outcome.
Discuss it more.
In the
Urgent
notes?
discussion needed. Yeah, okay. We ended on not knowing enough and needing to regroup, which is why I didn't mark it, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, Ben, do you want to talk about querying external labels?
Yes, I can talk for 1 minute. I actually have to run to another meeting. Yeah, I have this design of her namespace and Thanos large sharded number of Prometheus instances, and we would really like to be able to let users use their external labels in their recording rules so that they don't have to be confused about whether they can use those labels or not. Because right now they would take a query from Grafana and drop it into Prometheus into a recording rule, and it does nothing. And this is we want users to be able to use recording rules on the Prometheus side for the performance and efficiency that and the sharding, so that we don't have to maintain giant Thanos rulers that get overloaded and cause lots of network traffic and break constantly, and also isolate them.
So the idea is to ignore the external labels in PromQL query, not to add them to the output result.
Either way, I don't care. That's up for discussion. But being able to either ignore label keys, label names that are in there, or actually evaluate them, basically inject the external labels into the metric data. I'm not particularly picky about which method it is, as long as a query with labels that match external labels still works.
I think this smells like it should have the same issues we discussed when we wanted external labels in the alert templating. And then we decided to make it an explicit thing that you say external labels dot something to avoid all the overriding logic. And if we inject it into the query engine, we needed to face all the overriding logic that might happen, right?
Yeah, I guess it would work as it'd probably be useful as a query time flag, I think.
Unless I'm mistaken, we had this discussion sometime 2016 or so. Because I had quite a few use cases for similar, and back then we didn't do it. My own opinion from back then and still today is if we have a flag to basically just make external labels visible within a Prometheus instance across the complete Prometheus instance at the choice of the user, that is the cleanest implementation. It has the least risk for food shooting. You know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, that probably needs some thinking.
Yeah, like
Anyway, I
everything
gotta
can
run.
be.
Have fun debating.
See you. Like everything can be made configurable, but then in the end you have a million config options, and every Prometheus server will behave differently, and that's going to be
Yeah.
very confusing as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
also, if you run a sum, do you expect to have the external labels added to your sum output?
It's also, I mean, this whole argument of I can run it in Grafana and it works. I mean, this is.
Well, it works when you query Thanos, but I also want to query Prometheus because
Yeah, I mean,
it's
yeah,
a
right.
good UI.
If it works querying your remote storage, that might not necessarily be an argument that it should work on Prometheus, because your remote storage might also touch metrics coming from different Prometheus servers. And that, I mean, it's not surprising that the query doesn't work one-on-one. Not per se a requirement, I would say. And if you like, yeah, that's the thing, right? If you query through your remote storage, it's not that you query with Grafana compared to query Prometheus directly. That shouldn't change anything. Just be the remote storage. So yeah, now that Ben is gone, we can just decide we don't want this. I don't know.
I mean, the problem is if you write stuff for external labels and all of a sudden on a few machines you cannot use them, on another it works. It's just not good user experience.
Yeah, but what Julian said, right? External labels aren't meant to be in the local query. They are external. That's why.
But you also have the possibility to use a regex and to pipe to an empty value. So if the external labels are not set, then you still have to read the output. So we could fix this Grafana setup, right? We could fix these queries to do that.
I strongly believe in having features in Prometheus and not basically soft forcing people to use Grafana to make Prometheus convenient.
Not speaking about Grafana, I speak about the way you write these queries. Probably you can just write external label and then have a regex that points to the external label or nothing. And then you can copy paste it.
Which puts extra, like modifying your queries to account for this is at least intermediate level. It's error prone, and it puts more work on the user. I mean, I get why the argument is made. I still don't like it. And I don't even have a current use case, but I remember the pain of just things not working properly because that thing wasn't there. And also on the inverse, you test something on a local Prometheus instance, you don't have that, and you have something which you think is unique, and then you run it on a larger machine, and all of a sudden you have more than one, and yeah. But as Ben suggested it and went out halfway, maybe we can also or should shelve it until he's back, or for in-person.
Yes, having a design document with different options would be great.
Yeah, or just like demo a few use cases that might be way more convincing than discussing this. purely academically. And that might be also cool for the in-person thing, where you can just, whatever, project your laptop to the screen and we can all have an in-person discussion about it. I don't know. I'm probably raising a lot of expectations for the in-person devs.
Yeah,
But
you
let's
expect that
not
Linux has
close it.
fixed,
Let's keep it on the agenda and have it as one of the topics there.
I got to run
Okay.
for today. See ya.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have to. By the way, the label prefixing and metric name prefixing in client libraries, we discussed it 2 sessions ago. And the conclusion was that we just want to check existing use cases, how people are using this, especially in client Golang words there, and then see if those use cases are good or bad habits. And then you can decide if this should get duplicated or even propagated to other client libraries.
A time check, because we only have 15 minutes left with the new schedule, and also we don't really have full quorum anymore, so we shouldn't make any huge changes.
I think with the in-person Dev Summit imminent, we also don't have to cover a lot of ground here.
No. Golfing list, so we can't talk about. I mean, then we can also just touch on this other thing, and we can leave it open for in-person. The amount of metrics being emitted and or ingested by default. Prometheus gains. Sorry, what?
That's for client libraries or?
Yes, that's for client Golang.
Depends.
So the story is that we got new metrics in the Go runtime, and the Go team has pull requested that to the client Golang libraries, but this makes client Golang output more than 120 metrics by default, which is a lot. So we need to find a way to let the user choose which level of metrics they actually want from client Golang and find reasonable defaults.
The reason why, that's certainly also a reason. The reason why I put it in initially is, of course, we also just have more and more adoption, and as people adopt Prometheus more, it's more people with the problem. And also, as they put more in their systems onto Prometheus, even without changes to client Golang, they have this problem again and again and again, from what I can see. All of this boils down to the same thing. I think we should have the possibility to reduce the amount of metrics which are being emitted. I also think we should be able to reduce them in flight, blah, blah, blah. One thing, or I wrote down a few thoughts of how we could potentially do this. And again, we should discuss it in person more deeply, but just to whet your appetite. My main thought is similar to how SNMP and Blackbox Exporter have modules and such. We could have a URL parameter for verbosity and just say we want to have default, in-depth, whatever, which is not great because it is relatively static. But the nice thing would be that we are able, through languages, through exporter toolkit, blah, 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 basically provide a scaffolding which always treats things roughly the same, at least from how you interact with it. Another thought would be to attach a verbosity label, which can break with existing implementations and setups. It's also pretty static, so no huge benefit. We could do __ verbosity __, similar like name, and that's also horrible, so it's just for completeness sake. And also with all this in-flight processing and flight QL, blah, 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 we can also consider doing this later in the pipeline. My own thought is that we should at least explore and think about having it as part of the URL parameter, where you can say, I want to have the full depth here and I want to have less there. That also matches the operating model of different teams running different Prometheus servers, and scrape the same target and maybe getting more or less out of it. So that's the complete. brain dump.
I would like to add one option to this list because in the Java client library there is something that's there for a totally different reason, but could be used for that. You can filter metrics by metric name. So there is I don't want to get rid of metrics starting with a specific prefix or ending with a specific suffix or having the exact name. This was originally implemented because some JMX metrics had performance problems, and this was a way to filter them out. But it turns out this is pretty generic. So for example, if you want to get rid of created metrics, you just say, I don't want to see metrics ending in _created. Or if whatever, you don't want some internal metrics and they all have the same prefix, you can say, I don't want to see metrics starting with that name.
2 questions. A, this is code writing time, so it's not even compile or runtime. This is chosen.
It's configured. So the Java client library comes with ways how to expose them. One is a standalone HTTP server, one is a servlet, and these have configuration, but it depends on how you expose them.
Okay.
And
so
you can put it in code as well if you have your own way to expose them.
But from the perspective of a Prometheus server, it cannot change anything about this other than basically doing the same thing through relabeling and such. But it cannot say.
So the Prometheus server won't see the metrics that you filter out.
Okay. Because part of my thinking was with this like module thing, that if I'm running a Prometheus server and I want to have more now or less tomorrow, I can choose this without having to touch any of the running software.
I mean, what we could do, I mean, as this functionality is kind of useful in other cases as well, we could also have this as URL parameters so that you can have static configuration, prefixes to filter out or not. But you could also, there is already this name parameter that has been there for a while in client Java and client Python, I guess. Maybe we could extend this and have a prefix and a suffix parameter so that people can just mix and match stuff.
I'm somewhat wary of prefixes in the URL, and also you can do the same or similar with relabeling. But one example would be to allow mapping between those prefixes and suffixes through configuration to certain verbosity levels, because that is, I think, part of what the
Java. I mean, the relabeling I would object because the reason why it was originally implemented in client Java was that some metrics in some circumstances have performance issues if you scrape them, and so you need to prevent the scrape. You cannot scrape them and then throw them away afterwards.
Okay. Makes sense, which is also, by the way, part of, like, not the only reason, but part of the reason why SNMP exporter has module support, because sometimes you need different modules for the same hardware. Sometimes even running within the same company, because some of the OIDs will just kill the switch or the router, or the firewall or the what have you. And others can do this, depending on line card, depending on load, depending on blah, 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 blah. So this is actually a problem which we've seen in other places as well.
The issue linked by Bjorn basically matches what we need, right?
So what?
The issue that Bjorn mentioned in the chat is already contains the answer.
It is issue number 135. It's ancient.
I missed it. Sorry.
I pasted in the chat because we don't have meeting notes for this yet, and I wasn't sure if we wanted to take notes down.
Interestingly, this issue replaces part of the current discussion.
Exactly, yeah.
And just to note that, make it clear, this is already implemented in client Python and client Java.
This was also like, we should have a common way, not like every client library, if we do this, should use the same pattern so that you
Mhm.
could just
Yeah.
know how to use this if your client library supports it.
But the current parameter name, this is that's currently implemented. You need to have a list of exact names, which is kind of not feasible if you want to like get rid of these 2,000 metrics starting with whatever. So name starting with it's good because it's not a regular expression, so it's kind of a little bit
Well,
less.
to be honest, the issues with Klein-Golang are mainly histograms, so the names are don't have that many names. But there is that, or there is also the node exporter way of enabling our node collectors, which is also what I think you can do in Java. In the Java code, you enable multiple collectors, right? And
Yes.
so you could use the same for Klein-Golang, and when you pass the collectors that you want to enable in query parameter. But it should not conflict with, it should not conflict with node exporter collector. So you might need another param name, but.
I mean, the benefit or the nice thing would be that in the ecosystem, we already have a pattern of using URL parameters to basically access pre-existing configuration or code on the exporter or instrumentation side. And I mean, this is also like if we think this through, you can actually just add this to client Golang, or also in Java, like have a prefix match and say anything which falls under this property is now level. Like verbosity is such an old and overloaded term. I don't really like it, but it's also not wrong. You can also consider to go more like the module way of SNMP exporter and blackbox exporter, that people group stuff into certain things. I don't know, runtime and application logic or something. Though my gut is that this is maybe too blunt. But do I read the room correctly that we'd actually agree that we have a need here?
I mean, the question is how this filtering addresses that we have too many metrics by default if we just have all the Go runtime libraries that the Go team wants us to have. There's still this sounds more like we want by default not have that many metrics and have a button for people who want all the Go metrics to get them. But yeah, I don't know.
Which is, I mean, I would tend to agree that we should try and keep the defaults relatively static. So we shouldn't when you upgrade your Java version or whatever, we shouldn't have all of a sudden 100 more metrics per
Exactly, yeah.
Because that kind of thing tends to make users extremely unhappy.
Yeah, and that's why we kind of need a mechanism not to filter out metrics, but to tell the endpoint, yes, I want all those metrics that I wouldn't get by default.
Also, Fabian, is there any or Gautam, is there any precedent in OpenTelemetry also where, like, is this where on the wire or while requesting or what have you, you can already signal this somehow?
Good question. I don't know. Need to research.
Gautam, the topic is reducing the amount of overall metrics being emitted. And what we're currently discussing is basically signaling through URL parameters, similar to module and such of SNMP exporter and blackbox exporter, or to have configurable prefixes, suffixes, and such, which just prevent those metrics from even being generated. And then the follow-up question was if there is something within OpenTelemetry already which allows you to signal that.
Yeah, I don't know. I'll check.
Okay, because if there's something and we can use it that is probably, or if there's a nomenclature which makes sense or something, it would just make sense to align.
We'll check and report back.
Okay. Okay. One and a half minutes left. So dots in metric names. Let's do it. Sorry, it was an insider joke because that's one of the design decisions of Prometheus to not have dots in metric names. But
we might finally get dots in PromQL. We'll see. Very close in for histograms in the proof of concept to access the count and the sum in a histogram. And currently, my plan is, not to push this through, but just to put it into the proof of concept to see how it works, to have like the dot operator to get those fields without like creating a real evaluation. So yeah, that will be fun.
Can you prepare a small demo for the Dev Summit in Valencia?
ooh.
Yeah, I'll even want to demo stuff in at our booth. By the way, if we still need, Julius kind of dropped out of his slot for booth duty. I think we still have 2 slots to close for booth duty at KubeCon, but yeah, we'll see to that. So plan is, Ganesh is giving a talk about the histograms, and at least heat maps should be, like in a very hacky version of Grafana, should be able to be demonstrated, and then we could do this. I don't think I will get to this like PromQL changes with the dot operator, because that requires me to understand how PromQL parsing works and evaluation and everything. So I guess I need a bit of time, or somebody who is like a PromQL expert or parser expert will help me. We will see. But I hope that we can see heat maps, and the histogram quantile actually works quite well. We still get crashes when blocks need to be compacted or something, which Ganesh is aware of. But this is just like bugs. It's nothing conceptual that doesn't work. Yeah, okay. And now we're out of time. That was the teaser for Valencia.
So I hope everyone will attend.
Yeah.
Also, anyone who is currently in this call, you are heartily invited if you are in Valencia on Monday before KubeCon. We have an in-person thing, which is like, it's not super defined who gets in or what, but it is basically invite only, or friends and such. Anyone who made it into this call is more than welcome to join course. Like, obvious.
And hopefully we'll also be able to put it on a Google Meet so that external people can still witness.
Yes, we'll also try and do that. But if you are on site, now is a good time to tell us. Of course, we will try and get you in if you're there on Monday.
All right.
Okay, cool.
See you.
See you all soon. See ya.
Bye.